and there'll be time for questions at the end. And I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself from time to time, and this is one of those times. So here's a challenge question to get us started. I'm looking for your best guess. What percent of all the mammal mass on Earth do you think is made up of wild mammals? And you're not supposed to know the answer, so just make a guess. Just feel free to unmute yourself. I'm not going to call. I can't see everybody. So, anyone want to be brave and guess?
A small percentage.
A small percentage. Yeah, that's a good guess.
Very few.
Very few.
A lot less than you'd
3%?
expect.
14.5%.
Sorry, what was that? 15.5%?
14.5. That's a
14
guess.
and a half. Sorry, I overdid it by 1 percentage point. I love the
10%.
10%. Okay, so it turns out the answer is 4%. So humans make up about 1/3 of all of the mammalian biomass on Earth, and our livestock makes up just under 2/3. So that leaves just 4% for wild mammals. And when you cut out ocean mammals like whales and dolphins, we're down to just 2%. And it's a similar story for birds. Over 70% of avian biomass is farmed poultry. Our meat and dairy habit is gobbling up land, causing the extinction of wild animals, contributing to climate change, and squandering resources. Half of U.S. land is dedicated to animal agriculture. It's our food habits that are the major cause of species extinction and a huge contributor to climate change. So my name is Anna Larson. As you heard, I live in Minneapolis, and I'm a member of multiple climate organizations. I'm a mom of 2 teenagers. I work in the business world, and I have always been an environmentalist. And I'm also an animal lover, and I became vegetarian when I was 13. And about 15 years ago, I became completely plant-based, which means I stopped eating all animal-derived products, including dairy and eggs. And as I've done more research on the food we eat, I became aware of the connections between animal agriculture and environmental degradation, including climate change. And I wondered, I'm an environmentalist, I pay attention, I read the newsletters, why didn't I know about this? Why isn't anyone talking about this? So this talk is my way of sharing some of what I've learned. Nicola?
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicola Philpott. I want to thank Joanne and Laurie for inviting us to speak today. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm originally from the UK. I moved to New York 27 years ago to work in scientific research. And for the past 10 years, I've been a climate activist. And in that decade, I've found that eating less meat has been the easiest, cheapest, and one of the most effective climate actions that I've taken. It also aligns with my values of treading lightly. When I found out that it takes 4 times as much land to feed a person that eats meat versus a person that eats only plants, it was pretty clear to me that I should switch to plant-based eating. And if many of us did that, it would free up a lot of land so we'd be able to plant more trees, reforest, rewild, and increase our biodiversity. So what we're going to do this evening is Anna's going to talk about the connection between the food that we eat and climate change and environmental degradation. And then I will talk about some simple steps that I use to transition from eating meat every day to eating all plants.
Great. Thanks, Nicola. So this talk is about fighting climate change, and I know that many of you do things to help with that fight. I mean, we're talking to CCL after all. So things like driving electric vehicles or getting rooftop solar, installing heat pumps. And those are all great things, and we need to be doing them all. And in this presentation, we're going to make the case for why you should become reducitarian. That is, you need to eat less animal products, a lot less, to help fight climate change. And we aren't talking about Meatless Monday levels of reduction. That's not going to cut it. So the Lancet is the British equivalent of the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's a respected, thoroughly peer-reviewed scientific journal. And a few years ago, they commissioned a report to determine how humans should be eating for healthy bodies and a healthy planet. And their study, the Eat Lancet report, found that Americans are eating over 6 times more meat than our fair share for a healthy planet. So that means Meatless Mondays won't cut it. We'll have to flip it to Meaty Monday and make that the only day all week that you eat meat. You don't have to change your life and become vegan. Reducing your meat consumption and leaving the occasional animal-based food in your diet is a huge help. I'm not trying to take away your bacon or your cheese Danish or whatever it is that you love. I'm just saying to treat meat as a treat. Keep the animal products you really love in your diet and try substituting new things for the animal foods that you're just eating out of habit. So try swapping out the chicken breast on your salad for chickpeas, for example. And a great thing to know is you won't be alone in making this change. In the last 5 years, 30% of Americans have begun reducing their meat consumption to fight climate change. So now let's start by talking about the climate impact of our diet, that is, its greenhouse gas impact. So while we've rightly focused the climate fight on the fossil fuel industry, it turns out that fossil fuels are only 2/3 of our problem. The other 1/3 of climate change is associated with how we eat. And I only learned this recently, and it surprised me. And I bet it surprises you too. So let me say that again. 1/3 of climate change is caused by what we eat. Curbing fossil fuel use without changing how we eat won't get our climate to where it needs to be. So here's another challenge question. So come off mute and be brave. If you compare the amount of CO2 released for each pound used, how carbon intensive is a pound of beef compared to a pound of coal? Any guesses? Anyone want to make a guess?
Half?
Half? Yeah, that's a good guess, right? We don't know. We don't talk about this kind of thing.
I'm
Well,
gonna guess beef
uh-huh.
is more.
More. Yeah. Do you have a guess about how much more?
50% more.
50% more. Yeah. So 1.5 times as bad. Well, it turns out a pound of beef adds 40 times more planet warming gases to the atmosphere than burning a pound of coal. And it's not just about beef. A pound of shrimp costs us 10 times more carbon than coal. Cheese is 9 times. Pork and chicken are 4 or 5 times. So can you imagine that? Your family's chicken dinner, which feels pretty clean, is actually the equivalent of burning 5 or 10 pounds of dirty coal. And by comparison, a pound of lowly dried peas, another great protein source, creates just 1/3 the emissions of coal. All in, animal agriculture alone accounts for 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. Cow burps make up about half the climate impact of beef, for example, and land use is the other half of the problem. The total impact includes things like deforestation, soil degradation, manure management, fertilizer for feed crops, and then there's also the machinery, the food processing, transportation, and refrigeration along the life cycle chain. What this tells us is we have to stop eating so many animal products. When you eat animal products, go ahead and make sure that they're sustainably raised, but much more importantly, eat much less of them. I'm not talking Meatless Monday less, I'm talking a lot less. If you're taking steps to reduce your personal carbon footprint, eating much less meat and dairy should be high on your list of actions. So please reduce your flights, switch to an EV and install rooftop solar if it's in your budget, and for goodness sake, eat less meat. And the great news about reducing your animal product consumption is that you can start doing it today. You don't need to wait for a permit or for a solar garden to open. You can just go to the grocery store and buy different food. And another point worth remembering is that if you live with other people, switching your whole household to reducitarian will have 2 or 3 or 4 times this impact. And that really adds up. In addition to causing climate change, our food system is also impacted by climate change. Our food security is at risk as changing temperatures impact what can be grown and the yields we've come to expect. For wheat production, for example, each degree Celsius of hotter average temperatures decreases yield by about 5%. And for rice, which a large portion of our global population eats, a 1 degree increase in average temperature was linked to a 15% decrease in yield. In addition, increasingly erratic weather patterns threaten growing seasons and harvests from one year to the next. Floods one year, or droughts, or wildfires may cause entire harvests to be lost in some years. And some land is being permanently taken out of production due to desertification and sea level rise. And then on top of the reduced quantity of food, we also have to face reduced quality of food. Higher CO2 levels cause plants to grow more quickly. And while this may sound like a good thing, it actually results in less nutritious food. Grains and tubers, which are particularly important to diets in less wealthy areas, are especially susceptible to this reduced nutritional quality. In particular, protein, calcium, and iron, among other nutrients, decline. And even those of us in wealthier countries are affected. The intense monocultures we use to produce food at large scale leads to depleted soil nitrogen. This, in turn, causes other nutrients, especially vitamins and minerals, to be reduced in our food. And then poor nutrition makes people more susceptible to infectious diseases. Between lower crop yields, less nutritious food, and outright crop failures, people, especially in poorer countries, face significant risks to their food supply. And now let's move on from climate change and carbon dioxide emissions and discuss other ways that animal agriculture is damaging the earth. So it's time for another question. Prepare to unmute yourselves. What percentage of all the grain grown in the US is used for direct human consumption? Any guesses?
5%.
Maybe 20%.
5%, 20%. Yeah, something like that, right? Those seem like good guesses because we also know that some of it gets turned into ethanol. The answer is about 10%, a little bit less than 10% of all the grains we grow in the US are for direct human consumption. Most of the grains we grow are used to feed animals. So those amber waves of grain, they're for government subsidized chicken feed. If we stopped eating so many animals, we could grow a lot less grain and be able to return the excess farmland to nature. Natural land can sequester far more carbon than farmed land, and goodness knows we need to be sequestering carbon. On top of this, the monocultures and associated chemicals used to cultivate the enormous amounts of animal feed we require are hurting our planet in other ways. Among other things, it's leading to a decline in our insect populations. Insect levels have declined 70% since 1990. And now let's talk about deforestation. You won't be surprised to learn that cattle ranching is the biggest cause of deforestation in the Amazon. 75% of Brazil's deforestation is driven by cattle ranching. And this meat gets exported all over the world. In the US, big agriculture has made it illegal to require a country of origin label on meat, so you won't know if you're buying beef from deforested land. But the US imports over 1 billion pounds of beef from Brazil annually, so chances are good
The U.S.
that if
imports
you
over
know
1
someone
billion pounds of
who eats beef,
meat from
you know
Brazil.
someone who has
Over 1 billion
contributed
pounds of
to the
meat from
destruction
Brazil
of the Amazon.
that contributes to the destruction of the Amazon, of course, because of
Somebody's
it's illegal.
unmuted. If you could all just mute your lines, that would be super. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, so time for another question. Let's talk about water usage now. Beef uses a lot of water. You know that I like to pick on beef. How many daily showers equal the water used in 1/4 pound hamburger? Any guesses? And you're not supposed to know the answer. So, anyone want to be bold? Well, I often hear answers like, oh, like a couple of days, a week, maybe a couple of weeks. It turns out you could shower every day for 6 weeks to equal the water that's needed to produce a 1/4 pound hamburger. And that's not a big hamburger by American standards. Make it a double, add some special sauce, put a couple of slices of cheese on it, and you're approaching 6 months of showers. And I should point out, it's not that farm animals are incredibly thirsty. Most of the water is used to grow crops to feed the animals. So like in this picture, often the feed crops are grown in areas that need to be heavily irrigated. Half of the water that's needed to support an American's lifestyle is used for meat and dairy. I'm in Minnesota, so let's zoom in to what's going on in my state to talk about water pollution, or water pollution, as I like to call it. In Minnesota, we have a little over 5 million people, and we have 50 million farm animals, mostly in CAFOs. Those are confined animal feeding operations or intensive factory farms. We have 2 million cattle and 9 million pigs and lots of chickens and turkeys. And a cow makes 25 times the poop of a human, and a pig produces 10 times the waste of a human. In Minnesota, our farm animals create as much manure as almost 100 million people. And have you ever heard of a sewer for animal waste? No, that's not a thing. Animal waste is stored in lagoons, like the purple ponds in this picture, and sprayed on fields. But the land can't absorb such an intense amount of nutrients, and the excess ends up running off into streams and rivers and polluting the water table below ground. And I'd like to give you a sense of scale. In Minnesota, the current law says that any farmer can open up a factory farm with up to 1,000 cows as a matter of course. Any farmer can do it on their land. You don't need a special permit. It doesn't matter how big your land is or what your next door neighbor is doing. So the size of the lagoon needed to accommodate the waste from that number of animals is equivalent to 3.5 football fields. So now picture 3.5 football fields covered in cow waste. That's pretty gross, right? But there's one more thing. That lagoon needs to be 18 feet deep. That is what is needed for 1,000 cows. But remember, Minnesota has 2 million cattle. So we have 2,000 of these lagoons scattered around the state just for cattle. And then the pigs in the state require about twice that number of lagoons. And then we also have the waste from chickens and turkeys, too. The amount of animal waste we're talking about from factory farms in Minnesota alone blows your mind. And it's not just Minnesota. In Iowa, 2/3 of the lakes, streams, and rivers are impaired from all this animal waste. And in some Iowa lakes, people can no longer go kayaking because they get skin infections from the polluted water splashing on them. And in Michigan, one family realized that the factory farms within a 3-mile radius of their home produced as much waste in a day as the entire city of Chicago. The drinking water in almost every farming county in Minnesota is unsafe because of the high nitrogen runoff coming from factory farms and the associated intensive monocrop agriculture. 96% of Minnesota farming counties have nitrogen runoff above recommended levels. And the pollution doesn't stop at our borders. The excess nutrients change the ecology of rivers, causing mass fish die-offs. And then when the polluted river meets the ocean, the excess nutrients cause massive algae blooms that kill ocean life. And now we'll talk about antibiotics. In the US, 2/3 of the medically important antibiotics we use in our country are given to farm animals. Those are the kinds of antibiotics that doctors rely on to keep humans healthy and help us fight infections. And then on top of that, animals are also given other antibiotics that humans don't normally take. And these antibiotics are used for multiple reasons. First, they're given subtherapeutically to increase profits. It turns out animals given antibiotics gain weight faster than their non-medicated counterparts. And then antibiotics are also used as a cheap substitute for basic animal welfare. So who needs things like sufficient space or clean environments or adequate ventilation when you can just pump farm animals full of antibiotics to keep the germs at bay? And farmers don't wait for the animals to get sick. They give the antibiotics prophylactically to lower the risk of infectious diseases sweeping through the herd. Pigs in particular, because they're kept in such close quarters, use a lot of antibiotics. But we all know what happens when antibiotics are overused. This risks the development of antibiotic-resistant disease strains, including those that can jump to humans. And this means we're facing stronger bugs and we have less effective tools to fight them. And I want to be clear, I don't blame the farmers. I blame our ever more powerful industrial agriculture system. Farmers are beholden to the enormous power that these companies have. Farmers feel like they can't farm the way they want to and the way they have for generations before. The current industrial agriculture system demands that farmers participate in intensive animal agriculture. And now we'll leave the land and look at our oceans. We're emptying the oceans at an alarming rate. And so here's the final challenge question where I'm going to ask you to unmute yourselves. What's your best guess? What portion of the large ocean fish, so these are animals like sharks or rays, that we had 100 years ago, do you think we still have today? Any guesses?
10%.
10%. Yeah, that's a guess that I hear a lot. And I think that's a good guess. It turns out we have just 1/3 the population of large ocean fish that we had 100 years ago. And if you're thinking, oh, 1/3, that's not so bad. We've been talking about 5%, 10%, 4%. I want you to think about being in a stadium and it's a sold out show. Every seat is taken. It's vibrant and lively and everyone's having a good time. And then 2/3 of the people disappear. Now look around. Your nearest neighbor is 3 seats down. That stadium is a pretty sad and lonely place. It's no longer so full of life. This is the state of our oceans today. And then there's also ocean pollution. You may have heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. 80% of it is made up of fishing nets and other garbage from commercial fishing and aquaculture. You can't avoid damaging the earth by switching from eating land animals to eating sea animals. So there you have it. We've made our case for why you need to eat a lot less animal-based food. I have not seen a single credible climate scientist who says, yeah, we can just keep eating as much meat as we always have. The earth can handle it. That study doesn't exist. So I hope you're now thinking about what changes you can make to your own diet to make it more earth-friendly. And if you're like many people, this feels like a big ask. You might be wondering if you can negotiate this. Just make some minor changes at the margin. How about if I just... So let's go into that. What about if I just eat grass-fed meat and dairy? I need to tell you, there just isn't enough land on the planet to feed our current appetite for meat if this is how we raise it. If all American beef were raised with grass-fed methods, it would take more land than we have in the entire United States. And that's just for beef. The math for switching to grass-fed or regenerative farming, but not changing the quantity we eat, just doesn't work out. And regenerative agriculture holds some promise for sequestering carbon, but, and this is a big but, the animals raised on the typical regenerative farm produce more CO2 than the farm sequesters. Project Drawdown has said that restoring ecosystems and rewilding land has a much larger carbon storage potential than regenerative agriculture. And do you know what else? In the US, our per capita consumption of meat has increased 60% since 1961. And even since the year 2000, our per capita meat consumption has increased 25%. I bet many of you can remember the year 2000. It wasn't that long ago. We just keep upping our consumption of meat, and our planet is suffering for it. So if you're going to eat meat, then go ahead and get your meat from a regenerative farm. But please make sure you reduce your consumption of animal products by a lot. Please understand that eating regeneratively farmed meat and dairy doesn't give you a free pass to keep eating animal products at the same rate Americans are accustomed to. What about if I just go vegetarian? Eliminating meat but keeping dairy in the picture certainly helps. But remember that cows are a big emitter of methane. In Minnesota, for example, 90% of our methane emissions come from cattle. Plus, they're the water and poop issues that we've already discussed. It takes about 630 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. And to help you picture that, imagine a stack of 630 1-gallon jugs of water all stacked on top of each other. That stack is the height of a 50-story skyscraper. That is how much water is needed to produce 1 gallon of milk. If your morning just wouldn't be complete without cream in your coffee, don't sweat that little bit of dairy. Just understand that cutting out meat but adding in more cheese and yogurt is of limited benefit. Isn't fake meat resource intensive? In short, no. Compared to animal meat, there's virtually no competition. From an emissions, energy use, water, and land use perspective, plant-based alternatives win by a long shot. There is no scenario where you can claim you're choosing animal meat over plant-based meat for environmental reasons. Doesn't fake meat contain weird ingredients? We get a version of this question at almost every presentation we give, and the meat industry wants you to think that alternative meat products are highly processed and bad for you. And they've spent a lot of money putting that message out into the public. The truth is, most plant-based meats are largely made with ingredients you recognize or regularly purchase. If you listen to actual nutrition scientists and not influencers, you'll hear that our demonization of ultra-processed foods is missing the boat. It's far more important to look at what is in your food rather than how it was processed. For example, if you compare the health of a bowl of grape nuts and ultra-processed breakfast cereal to a couple of eggs fried in butter, there is no question the bowl of grape nuts is better for your health on every count. If you aren't comfortable eating plant-based meat alternatives, then don't eat them. There are so many delicious meals you can make from beans, grains, nuts, tofu, mushrooms, fruits, and vegetables. It's important to remember, eating fewer animal products doesn't have to be all or nothing. Going reducitarian is just fine. So many respected scientific journals have published studies saying that we're eating way too many animal products for a healthy planet. We all need to cut down on our meat consumption, way more than just meatless Mondays. Instead, we need to shoot for meaty Mondays, 1 day a week of eating meat. So now I'm going to hand over to Nicola, who will lead a discussion about how you can start eating more plants.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to talk about how I moved from eating meat every day to eating all plants. When I first became alarmed about the climate crisis, I rushed out and bought a share in my local community solar garden, and that provides all the electricity for my home. And I went to DC with Citizens Climate Lobby. I've been several times to lobby for effective climate legislation. And I organized a solar array at my kids' school. And also I went vegan. And then since then, I've bought an electric vehicle, an induction stove, and a heat pump to heat and cool my home. And we should all do as many of these things as we can and as much as our budget will allow. But what I've found is that transitioning to plant-based eating has been the cheapest, easiest, and one of the most effective climate actions that I've ever taken. And so despite what Anna said about Meatless Mondays, my journey did start with Meatless Mondays. And I began by looking at the meals that I was already preparing and made some very simple switches. So one of those things was a chicken curry. And instead of making it with chicken, I made it with chickpeas instead, or tofu. And then, so every Monday we're having some kind of chickpea or tofu curry. And this was so straightforward that it soon evolved to also include mixed bean chili on Thursdays and a tofu or vegetable stir fry on Saturdays. And I make lots of food, I freeze some down, I eat some the next day. And so with these three simple switches, my family have halved the amount of meat that we're eating. And but we don't live in isolation. We have extended family, we have friends. Most of those people are omnivores. They eat meat to some extent, and they come over for dinner. And when they come over in the summer, we'll have a grill out and we'll make Impossible burgers, Beyond sausages, lots of grilled vegetables, potato salad, fruit salad. All the food is plant-based and everyone really likes the food, even the people that claim to be carnivores. I also have a couple of kids and they are teenagers now, and famously teenagers eat a lot. So it's really important that I make food that they really like. So I make vegan shepherd's pie, lentil sloppy joes, black bean burritos, minestrone, vegan lasagna, curried tofu, on and on, all kinds of food. And I will put in the chat some of our family favorite recipes so you can try them at home, and you can also explore those websites to find your own favorites. So I'm a big fan of cookbooks, and these are some of my favorites and also Anna's favorites. So although initially I started by making some very simple switches to recipes that contained meat, so I was eliminating the meat and including more legumes, it's really worth looking at what vegan chefs are doing, because they really have magical ways of making the food tasty and delicious. I looked at being vegan as an adventure and trying new foods and new techniques in the kitchen and new recipes. It's been useful for me to think about food more broadly. So I'm looking at foods from around the world, and instead of thinking about meat as the centerpiece of the meal and vegetables as kind of secondary, like a meat and potatoes meal, I'm making lots of sort of, I guess, one pot dishes like curries and stir fries and pasta bakes, casseroles, stews, things like that. And many of these recipes, they don't contain meat in the first place, but if they do, it's very easy to switch out the meat and replace it with either a fake meat alternative that you can get in the store now, or just legumes or tofu or seitan or tempeh, peas, lentils, things like that. So speaking about these kinds of legumes and meat alternatives and beans and lentils and tofu and things like that, they're very high in protein, but it turns out we don't need a lot of protein for a healthy diet. We only need 0.36 grams per pound of our body weight. So that's about 50 grams or 2 ounces of protein per day. And so protein consumption is not something I worry about for myself or my kids. I know that if we're getting a variety of fruits, vegetables, and grains, and mushrooms, things like that, we're getting a whole array of amino acids, and we're getting the complete array of amino acids that we need for a healthy diet. Something we might all want to think a bit more about is the amount of fiber that we're consuming, because 90% of us aren't consuming enough fiber. And fiber is only in fruit, vegetables, and grains. It's not in any animal product. So if we want to increase the fiber in our diet, we have to eat more plants. So my motivation for plant-based eating has changed over time. It started out as being about climate change and local environmental issues. And then it evolved to be about ethical and social justice reasons. And then a couple of years ago, my dad was diagnosed with cardiovascular disease. And so now I'm very enthusiastic about the health benefits of plant-based eating. And it's really reassuring to me to know that there's no cholesterol in plants. Cholesterol is made in the liver of animals, so I can eat as much and many plants as I want without consuming more cholesterol. Okay, so I want to talk about community because it's much easier to make changes in your life if you are around people that are making similar changes or that have made those changes before. And the point I want to make here is that there are lots of us out there. There are lots of people that are transitioning from eating meat, dairy, and eggs towards eating more plants. And that can be for a whole variety of reasons, as I mentioned. It's often about health. It can be ethical reasons, environmental, climate, or social justice reasons. And so when I moved to my local area a couple of years ago, I started to organize plant-based potlucks at my local brewery. There's actually an adjoining coffee shop to the brewery, and that's closed in the evenings. And I reserve the whole space and invite the public to come along. It's free to attend. Every month we gather, and people bring a dish to share. And that can be as simple as a bowl of fruit or a bag of grapes, something like that. Or it's much more elaborate dishes from people that really love to cook. The food is really delicious. Many people bring fantastic desserts, and it's a really relaxed social environment. You can get a beer if you want. And if you are in the area, I would invite you to come along. But I want to suggest that you organize your own plant-based potlucks and set up your own community around plant-based eating to share recipes, to share ideas, and share things that you've enjoyed. Okay, I think I'm going to skip this slide and just go on to my last slide. So I want to end by saying that according to Project Drawdown, the two most effective climate actions that we can take are 1, reduce our food waste, and 2, adopt a plant-rich diet. And many teens are choosing plant-based eating as perhaps their first climate action. So as a parent of teens, I want to support my teenagers in the choices that they make. And as a climate activist, I want to encourage youth to make environmentally conscious choices and support them, giving them control over the future of their planet. It's really important to me that these young people have a positive experience with their first climate action, because then perhaps they will take further climate action in future. Okay, so now I will hand back to Anna, and she is going to talk about how you can be an ally.
Great. Thank you, Nicola. This isn't just about you and your personal consumption. We need to rapidly transition to a world where eating meat and dairy 2 or 3 times a day is not the norm. So here are some things you can do beyond your own kitchen. Talk to people about why you're reducing your consumption of animal products. Share some of the information from this presentation that you find compelling. Just like other aspects of fighting climate change, talking to others about the problems with our current systems and habits brings them into public consciousness and opens the door for change to occur. Let your elected representatives know that this issue matters to you and lend your voice to the campaigns of others. Big Ag receives billions in subsidies each year, and you can bet they're fighting hard to keep that government money flowing. So sign those petitions and write those letters. Support plant-based initiatives for school lunches, for hospital meals, in your church or office. You don't have to do it all, but advocate in the places that matter to you and support others who are leading the charge elsewhere. And finally, order plant-based menu options in restaurants. Restaurants and our dining companions need to know about the choices we're making and why. And a nice thing you may discover is that many people you already know may also be making these changes. There are many reasons to switch to a plant-rich diet: planetary health, your own personal health, and the ethics of how farm animals and farm workers are treated. And these are just a few suggestions to get you started if you're interested in learning more. Eating more plants is not controversial. There is not a doctor in the world who will tell you that you can eat too many plants. There is not an environmentalist in the world who will say that we're growing too many plants for human consumption. That's not a thing. The next time you're planning your dinner or you're at the grocery store shopping for the week, I challenge you to include some meatless, fully plant-based meals in your plan. Join the 30% of Americans who have already started making this change. Start with a single step, but start. So now we'd like to hear from you. What questions do you have for us? We'd like to hear some of the ways that you're planning to reduce your consumption of animal products, or maybe share what you're already doing. So I'm going to stop screen sharing so that I can see everyone at the same time. And I'll let Joanne tell me how this is usually handled, if you want people to raise their hands or if it can be a free-for-all.
Thanks so much, everybody. We've got a pretty good number on, so I think it would be great if you ask your question in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, and we'll try to look out for everybody. I know that we had a couple questions already in the chat. Denise, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask your question about graphics.
Well, yeah, I mean, even my UU congregation, as well as CCL chapters I belong to, we're holding more table events. I'm seeing the recipes. That's wonderful. But is there a suggested plan? This is new to me, the reducitarian. That's all new to me. How do I say it's part of a mission, including a campaign like this with something CCL is sponsoring, whether it be candidates, debates, that sort of thing. We're trying to make it a wholesome theme. What do you suggest?
One thing that I've done so I help lead Climate Reality locally. And one thing that I've done to promote plant-based eating at our tables is that I've made a magnet game where people have to kind of bucket these different personal climate actions they can take into high impact, medium impact, and low impact. And frankly, it stems from people walking up and talking to me about how they recycle and feeling very proud of themselves and walking away. And so I want them to understand that there are much higher impact actions they can take, including things like reducing their flights and, switching to an EV or public transportation. And plant-based eating is also in that high impact bucket. And so that's one way to get the conversation started without them feeling scolded. Nicola, I don't know if you have other thoughts about how this can be effectively incorporated into a table.
We have a spin wheel, and they just have letters on them, and the letter corresponds to a question that we might ask, like some of the issues that Anna brought up. So, how much of the mammalian weight on the planet is wild, that sort of thing, and how much of our grain is used for human consumption. So you ask the visitor to your table this question, they ponder it like we've asked you this evening, and then you can give them the real answer. And then if they get it right, then you can give them a piece of candy or something. But yeah, so a spin wheel is always decorative and it's moving, so it draws people over to your table.
Fantastic ideas.
Awesome, thank you.
Deborah, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if anybody in in the audience has ideas, I'd love to hear them as well. So feel free to to share your ideas for effective tabling. Looks like maybe Robert is next.
Yeah, and Nicole, that was a beautiful presentation. Thank you. A lot of the people, both on this call and in the CCL Health team, give lots of presentations. Do you mind sharing your slides? And may they use them in their own presentations with proper credits?
Of course, yes, we're happy to share.
Wonderful, thank you.
That's wonderful. And yeah, we'd love to even put a PDF, I think, in the health team forums.
Oh, wonderful.
Allie, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. So I'm Ali Saad. I live in Boulder. I'm boarded in lifestyle medicine. I'm affiliate faculty at the Climate and Health program at the University of Colorado, and my specific interest is food and climate change. So, very interested in your talk. And I've been doing this for a while. And one of the things that I found is as soon as you say plant-based or vegan to people, they're immediately turned off. There's this association that it's gross. And honestly, in my opinion, it often is, because people just, our culture is so focused on dishes that feature animal products as the main ingredient. And so we've gotten good at cooking things that feature them. But if you're coming from a culture that's not experienced at using chickpeas or lentils or whatever, odds are you're not going to have good success making a tasty meal without the right experience and techniques, because it's going to be different. And so one thing that I found to be effective in dealing with Western audiences or Western patients that don't necessarily have as many plant proteins and legumes in their diets is, rather than cutting the meat out, just like lessening the meat. So if there's like a dish that has chicken, for example, I'll say like, that's fine. Maybe use half the chicken you usually use and add some chickpeas, like you suggested. And that people seem to be much more on board with that, because then they're just like adding something, but they're not really changing the core recipe and losing those flavors that they love. So that's one thing that I found to be effective. And then I want to get your thoughts on the whole farmer angle, because in my opinion, the poor small family farmer is a straw man argument that big agriculture has been using. And I think what we need to be doing as climate advocates is to really flip that argument on its head and support the small family farmers, and say, you want to grow your own beef, you want to do whatever, that's great. Because really, in terms of like the whole reducitarian principle, if we get rid of factory farming, or at least significantly decrease it, and support these small family farmers, they would be producing higher quality animal products under more humane conditions that would cost more, but ultimately we should be paying more for these animal products that are very resource intensive. And one way to spin it to people, to like, just the consumer, is saying that it's fancy, that it's, leveraging other values, that you're supporting local communities, that, it has a better fat profile, whatever it is. I really like this. I totally get what you were saying about we can't just switch to seafood and, that's the solution. But, there's this craze on TikTok. I don't know if you're familiar with it, where people would bring up these tinned fish and say like, oh, I have my tinned sardines and my tinned mackerel, and it's fancy, and it's from Portugal or it's from Spain, and they'll make meals around it. And, it's not going to be as good as legumes, of course, but it's certainly going to be better than beef and dairy. And so I think leveraging fads like that people are already on board with, and highlighting the climate benefits and potentially the health benefits as well, is really helpful. But how have you guys dealt with the whole small family farmer argument? And have you been able to successfully ally with farmers? Because I know that their hands are kind of tied. They have these seeds that they have to buy from this big company, and then they have to, sell their grains or the animal products back to these big companies, and they're just kind of middlemen. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how you've approached this small family farmer conundrum.
Yeah, Ali, I love everything that you said, and I so agree with all of that. Regarding the small family farmers, I don't have a perfect answer. I do know, things like Cory Booker, a senator from New Jersey, he pays attention to the small family farmers, even though he's from New Jersey. And he's got kind of proposals to support them. So that's one direction where we tend to point people towards. I know that there are some very small programs to help family farmers kind of exit their contracts with these big animal ag companies and maybe start growing mushrooms or microgreens or something like that instead. Right now, all of that is happening at a really small scale. So I don't have, I can't point to like a silver bullet solution, but there are examples of successful transitions. Nicola, I don't know if you have other thoughts, or again, if other people in this audience maybe have ideas as well.
I do know that I'm slightly frustrated in Minnesota because we grow a lot of soy here, and yet the soy milk is a lot more expensive than dairy milk, which is one of the issues that We are campaigning in schools to have the plant-based option for kids that are lactose intolerant, among other things. And it's frustrating that a carton of soy milk costs more than dairy milk because the dairy is being subsidized by the government. But in general, I believe that politicians won't make changes until enough of the population want them to. I've learned that from CCL. So, we have to start making the changes ourselves before we can expect politicians to, in general. Though I am a great fan of Cory Booker.
Jay, I see you, but first I wanted to give Deborah a chance if you want to unmute and ask your question about backyard eggs or eggs from small local farms.
Yeah, as a gardener, I know that we need poop in the soil, or it certainly helps. And so if somebody's raising their own chickens and getting their own eggs, I don't have a problem with that. I wish there was more support for those. I mean, there's a whole difference in everything about that food than the food that comes from CAFOs, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that's similar to what Ollie was saying about, at small scale production is much more expensive. But it should be. The other thing that's worth remembering, though, about backyard chickens is that it actually takes a lot of land for them to really forage, to get all of their food from just from the yard. And the vast majority of them are fed animal feed. So 50% of all of the soy that's grown in the world is used for chicken feed. So just be conscious of the amount of soy or other purchased grains from off-site that are being used to support those animals.
So I think we have time for one more question, and just a heads up to anybody, there's so many resources in the chat. If you open your chat and you click on the 3 dots at the top, you can save it, and therefore you can save all those resources that Nicola put there. And for anybody who wasn't able to hear all of this presentation, we will have the recording available, and it's all our recordings are put out on CCL Health Action Team's YouTube page. So we'll have those out hopefully pretty soon. All right, Jay?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe chip in because this whole conversation, same with soy and corn, is the industrial production of those products, right? That, there's a series of chemicals go in. We're literally killing the soil and the ecology that supports the macronutrients that are healthy to us as well. And these things are getting fed to animal feed, and animals were always intended for ruminants anyway, up on in the field, because it's part of what ecology does. And I got to think, even as we talk about going to plant-based diets, that we really need to think about the ecological setting and the values and how ecology actually gives and provides the nutrients that we need versus some of the industrial process we're doing now for ethanol production and other food stuff that then shows up in our food with zero or next to zero macronutrients, because we're literally killing the soil. So anyway, I just want to add there's a much deeper story in this, I think, that we need to talk about on food that goes even beyond just protein, but how we grow this stuff and how do we do things like put organic content back in the soil as it was intended to be.
I agree with that. And CCL does not talk about soil enough.
Any response, Nicola or Anna, or any last thoughts?
Jay, I agree with you. And the soil is so important to our earth, and it's useful for sequestering carbon as well. Healthy soils sequester carbon as opposed to leaking it. So it fits very nicely with CCL's mission.
Yes, I agree. We should be talking more about food and how we can use that as a solution to climate change.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. This was just so informative and so entertaining. And I, who have kind of been deep in the weeds in this, did not know the term reducitarian until just now tonight. So I appreciate it so much. We really thank you for all your expertise and all your hard work in this field and for joining us. Thanks everybody who was on tonight.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. You got the recording?